Michael "Red" O'Connor and Jamal Thompson weren't just street dealers from Toxteth. They were the architects of Liverpool's most dangerous cocaine empire. What started as a desperate hustle on the city's roughest corners would soon connect them to ruthless cartels thousands of miles away, turning local gangs into international traffickers. This is the untold story of how two young men changed the face of crime forever, and how their reach stretched far beyond Liverpool's docks. In the heart of Liverpool, Toxteth had long been known as a neighborhood marked by hardship. Years of economic decline, unemployment, and social struggles had left its streets rough and its people wary. But beneath the surface of everyday life, a darker world was quietly taking shape. Small groups of young men, pushed to the edges of society and desperate for money, started turning to dealing drugs as a way out. At first, it was just about local corners, selling small amounts of cocaine and other narcotics to those nearby. The money was quick and tempting, and it offered an escape from the bleakness of their daily lives. What began as simple street-level dealing soon developed into something more organized. These young men learned from their mistakes, and from watching others, that to survive in this dangerous world, they needed rules and structure. A loose network of dealers formed, bound by loyalty and necessity. This was the beginning of a gang known locally as the Reds. Their name was simple, but their ambitions were anything but. The Reds quickly gained control over large parts of Toxteth, pushing out rivals with intimidation and force. But unlike many gangs that focused only on power through violence, the Reds were smart. They realized that the real wealth was in moving cocaine on a much bigger scale. Demand for cocaine was rising all over the UK, and the gang's leaders understood that they could no longer be satisfied with small deals on the streets. They had to think bigger, much bigger. At first they began by connecting with contacts outside Liverpool, arranging small shipments that could be smuggled through the city's port. These shipments were risky, but they paid off. The Reds began to amass money and influence, allowing them to invest in better communication tools and bribe officials. As their network grew, so did their confidence. They were no longer just street dealers. They were becoming players in a dangerous high-stakes game. This transformation marked the start of a journey that would take them far beyond Toxteth streets, all the way to the heart of global drug cartel. The Reds' rise to power in Toxteth was swift and brutal. What had started as a loose group of young men dealing small amounts of cocaine quickly evolved into a tightly controlled gang with a clear hierarchy. Their leader, a man in his early 20s with a sharp mind and ruthless streak, was unlike any criminal the neighborhood had seen before. He understood that violence alone couldn't secure long-term control. They needed strategy, connections, and a vision for the future. Under his leadership, the Reds began to transform from street-level dealers into a criminal organization with far-reaching ambitions. The gang's influence spread beyond the borders of Toxteth. As they moved into neighboring districts and started to carve out territories, their reputation for brutality kept rival gangs at bay, but it was their growing network of contacts that truly set them apart. They began forging alliances with other gangs across Liverpool and even in cities like Manchester and London. These relationships were crucial. They opened doors to larger markets and allowed the Reds to move bigger quantities of cocaine more efficiently. The leader's strategy was clear: expand supply, protect the product, and control distribution. To do this, the Reds started investing heavily in securing their sources. They reached out to suppliers in Europe, making deals to bring cocaine directly into the UK through Liverpool's busy port. This shift from street dealing to importing marked a dangerous but necessary step for the gang. They were no longer just pushing drugs locally, they were involved in an international operation. Money began flooding in, and with it came power and influence. The Reds started bribing port officials, customs agents, and even local politicians to ensure their shipments passed without interference. They bought high-end vehicles, properties, and hired professionals to launder their earnings. But beneath the surface of this growing empire was a fragile web of secrecy and fear. Trust was rare, and betrayal could come from any corner. The Reds had become more than a gang. They were a criminal machine built on loyalty, fear, and ambition, ready to take on challenges far beyond Liverpool's streets. The success of the Reds depended heavily on their ability to move cocaine through Liverpool's bustling port without attracting attention. The docks had long been a hub for trade, but also a place where illicit goods could slip through if handled with care. The gang quickly learned that controlling the port was key to growing their operation. To do this, they didn't rely solely on muscle or intimidation. They built a network of insiders who could help them navigate the complex world of shipping and customs. At the heart of this network were dock workers who could manipulate shipments, making sure the cocaine was hidden in containers destined for the UK. These men were crucial, as they had the knowledge and access needed to bypass security checks. In return for a cut of the profits, they agreed to keep quiet and look the other way. Taxi drivers and small-time criminals also played important roles, moving drugs from the docks to warehouses or street dealers under the radar. This system wasn't perfect, and the risk was always high. Smuggling drugs through a busy port meant constant vigilance and careful planning. The Reds became experts at finding weaknesses in the customs process, exploiting gaps where shipments could be overlooked or misclassified. Sometimes they even used decoy containers filled with legal goods to distract customs officers while the real drugs moved through. The gang also embraced new technology. They used encrypted phones and coded messages to avoid police surveillance, constantly changing their routes and tactics to stay ahead of law enforcement. Their growing sophistication made it harder for police to track shipments or intercept drugs before they hit the streets. As the volume of cocaine coming through Liverpool increased, so did the stakes. More money flowed into the Reds' coffers, allowing them to expand their influence and tighten their grip on the city's drug trade. But this expansion did not go unnoticed. Law enforcement agencies began to take a closer interest in the port and the gang's activities. The challenge for the Reds was clear: maintain control of the docks or risk losing everything. Their ability to smuggle cocaine through Liverpool's port became the foundation of what would soon grow into an international drug empire. As pressure from the police increased, the Reds realized that their old ways of operating were no longer safe. The streets of Toxteth had become too dangerous, with constant surveillance and frequent raids disrupting their business. To survive and thrive, they had to adapt quickly. The gang began moving away from open drug deals on street corners and shifted toward more secretive methods. Warehouses hidden in industrial areas replaced public meeting spots, and encrypted phones became the norm for communication. This change in approach made the Reds harder to track, but it also meant they had to build a more complex network. They started recruiting trusted insiders to handle different parts of the operation, from receiving shipments at the port to managing distribution across cities. Each link in the chain was carefully guarded, with members only knowing what they needed to know. This secrecy reduced the risk of betrayal and helped protect the gang from infiltration by law enforcement. Beyond Liverpool, the Reds began forming alliances with gangs in other cities, including London and Manchester. These connections allowed them to move cocaine faster and into new markets. The demand for cocaine was booming, and the Reds were ready to supply it. Their ability to coordinate shipments and deliveries across multiple cities made them a powerful force in the UK drug trade. With these wider contacts came new challenges. They had to deal with rival gangs, manage the logistics of long-distance transportation, and navigate the ever-watchful eyes of the police. The Reds relied heavily on technology, using encrypted messaging apps and burner phones to avoid detection. Their operations became increasingly sophisticated, with routes and methods changing regularly to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. Despite the risks, the gang's confidence grew. They were no longer just local dealers fighting for control of a neighborhood. They were players on a much larger stage. This transformation marked a critical turning point. The Reds had become more than just a gang. They were evolving into a professional criminal network with international ambitions. The journey from Toxteth streets to global drug trafficking had begun, and the city's docks were only the first step. The true scale of the Reds' operation only became clear when intelligence agencies uncovered a shocking connection. the gang was working directly with a powerful South American cartel. This alliance was a game changer, revealing that what had started as a local drug operation had grown into a link in a vast international supply chain. The cartel, known for its ruthless tactics and vast reach, saw Liverpool's port as an ideal entry point into Europe. The Reds, with their control over the docks and experience in smuggling, were the perfect partners. This connection opened the door to a much larger flow of cocaine. Instead of small shipments, the Reds now coordinated the import of tons of the drug, carefully concealed within legitimate cargo. The cartel provided the product and muscle, while the Reds ensured it moved smoothly through the port and into UK markets. This partnership brought enormous profits, but also brought new dangers. The cartel's involvement meant that the stakes were higher than ever. They operated with brutal efficiency and demanded loyalty and islands. Any hint of betrayal was met with violent retribution. The Reds, once just local, the conflict was no longer just about drugs or territory. It was a battle for power, survival, and control over a highly profitable empire. The violence was brutal and unpredictable. Shootings, stabbings, and bombings became disturbingly common, with innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. Families living near the docks and in surrounding neighborhoods lived in constant fear, unsure when the next outbreak of violence might erupt. The once vibrant community of Toxteth became a place marked by tension and grief. The cartel's enforcers also brought a new level of brutality to the conflict. Known for their harsh methods back in South America, they introduced a level of discipline and intimidation that rival gangs had never experienced before. The Reds' enemies quickly learned that challenging this new alliance was not only dangerous but often deadly. Fear spread through the streets, forcing some gangs to either flee or submit to the cartel's influence. Public outrage over the escalating violence grew rapidly. Media outlets began reporting on the bloodshed and chaos, painting a grim picture of Liverpool's inner city. The government faced increasing pressure to act decisively and restore order. Police resources were stretched thin as they struggled to respond to the violence and dismantle the growing criminal network. Despite the crackdown, the Reds and their cartel allies remained resilient. Their deep-rooted connections and wealth allowed them to continue operating, often outsmarting the authorities. The streets of Liverpool had become a dangerous battleground where power was fought for with gunfire and fear. This period of bloodshed marked one of the darkest chapters in the city's recent history and set the stage for a law enforcement response that would eventually challenge the gang's grip on the city. To truly understand the inner workings of the Reds and their cartel connection, British law enforcement knew they needed someone on the inside. Sending in undercover agents was always risky, but this operation required a deep cover agent willing to live a double life in the dangerous world of drug trafficking. The man chosen was trained to blend in seamlessly, to earn the trust of the gang and gather critical intelligence without being detected. The agent's life quickly became a constant tightrope walk. Every move, every conversation, had to be barely measured. The Reds were suspicious by nature, always watching for signs of betrayal or infiltration. The agent had to prove loyalty again and again, participating in day-to-day activities and slowly gaining access to the higher ranks of the organization. This undercover work was exhausting, isolating, and extremely dangerous. One wrong step could have meant exposure and almost certain death. Through months of covert surveillance and careful interaction, the agent uncovered the full complexity of the Reds' operation. It wasn't just about street-level dealing anymore. He saw how shipments were coordinated from South America, routed through the Liverpool docks, and then distributed across cities in the UK. The gang's use of encrypted phones and coded messages made communication difficult to intercept, but the agent's presence provided invaluable insight into their methods. He also discovered the financial side of the operation: hidden bank accounts, money laundering schemes, and secret investments. The Reds were funneling millions into legitimate businesses to hide their profits, making the drug trade appear almost invisible on paper. This knowledge was crucial for law enforcement to target the gang's infrastructure, not just the street-level dealers. Despite the danger, the agent continued to report back detailed information, helping build a case that could bring down the entire network. However, the tension was constant. The Reds were clever and always one step ahead, making the undercover mission a high-stakes game where failure meant disaster. The agents' bravery and persistence became one of the key reasons law enforcement could finally begin to unravel Liverpool's cocaine connection. After months of careful planning and gathering intelligence, law enforcement prepared to launch their most ambitious operation yet, a massive sting, targeting the largest cocaine shipment ever smuggled through Liverpool's port. This shipment represented not just a huge haul of drugs, but a critical blow to the Reds and their cartel partners. Seizing it would disrupt their entire supply chain and send a clear message that the authorities were closing in. The operation involved coordination between multiple agencies, including local police, customs officials, and international partners. Every detail was mapped out to ensure success. Surveillance teams monitored the docks, undercover agents tracked suspicious activity, and officers were ready to intercept the shipment at the exact moment it arrived. The sense of anticipation was intense. Everyone knew this was a rare chance to strike a major blow against a powerful criminal network. But just days before the planned raid, disaster struck. A leak within law enforcement itself compromised the entire mission. Sensitive information about the operation reached the Reds and their cartel contacts, allowing them to act swiftly. The shipment was mysteriously rerouted and disappeared without a trace. The sting that promised to dismantle the gang's empire had almost failed before it even began. The failed operation sent shockwaves through the police force and government agencies. It raised urgent questions about corruption and betrayal from within the ranks. If someone on the inside could tip off the criminals, how many other secrets were being compromised? Trust became fragile, and morale dropped as the investigators faced the frustration of seeing their hard work undone. For the Reds and the cartel, the leak was a powerful reminder of the complex web of influence they wielded. It showed they had allies, or at least informants embedded deep within the system. The shipment's disappearance bought them time to regroup, but it also made law enforcement even more determined to root out corruption and strengthen their efforts. The failed sting was a harsh lesson in the dangers of fighting a well-connected and sophisticated criminal network. It forced authorities to rethink their strategies and redouble their efforts to bring Liverpool's cocaine empire crashing down once and for all. After the devastating failure of the previous operation, law enforcement knew they had to change their approach. A new joint task force was formed, combining the expertise of British police, customs officials, and international agencies, including Interpol and Europol. Their mission was clear: to dismantle the financial backbone of the Reds and their cartel allies. The focus shifted from just intercepting shipments to attacking the money that fueled the entire operation. Investigators began tracking the complex money laundering networks that hid millions of pounds in illicit profits. These funds were funneled through a web of legitimate businesses, car dealerships, nightclubs, and property investments, all carefully designed to mask the true source of the wealth. By freezing bank accounts and seizing assets, authorities aimed to cripple the gang's ability to pay bribes, fund violence, and move drugs. This financial pressure forced cracks within the organization. Key members, facing the threat of losing everything, became vulnerable. Some cooperated with authorities, providing crucial information that exposed more players and revealed hidden connections. Several high-ranking figures within the Reds were arrested, their arrests carefully timed to avoid tipping off others. These arrests didn't just weaken the gang, they sent a message that no one was untouchable. The operation also involved extraditing suspects to countries where they faced charges for international crimes, raking the gang's network across borders. Coordinated raids in multiple cities dismantled warehouses, seized vehicles, and disrupted communication lines. The Reds' grip on Liverpool's cocaine trade began to loosen as their infrastructure collapsed under the weight of law enforcement's combined efforts. Though the cartel remained a shadowy presence, the partnership with the Reds was effectively broken. The gang's leaders faced long prison sentences, and their empire crumbled. Liverpool's streets slowly started to regain a sense of safety. But the victory came with a stark reminder: the fight against drug trafficking was far from over. The success of the task force showed that, with determination and cooperation, even the most entrenched criminal networks could be challenged. But the legacy of the Reds lingered, a warning that new threats could emerge from the shadows at any time. Even after the downfall of the Reds and the dismantling of their cartel connections, the cocaine trade in Liverpool did not disappear. The gang's empire had been broken, but the demand for drugs remained strong, and the city's troubled neighborhoods were still vulnerable to new criminal influences. In the vacuum left behind, smaller gangs and ambitious individuals began to rise, eager to fill the space and claim their own slice of the drug market. These new groups were different in some ways but shared many traits with the Reds. They studied the old gang's methods, learning from their mistakes and successes. Some maintained loose ties to international suppliers, while others tried to build local networks. The cocaine trade continued to adapt and evolve, always finding new routes, new methods, and new people willing to risk everything for quick money. The legacy of the Reds cast a long shadow over Liverpool. For many, the gang's story was a cautionary tale about how poverty, desperation, and opportunity could combine to create something dangerous and far-reaching. Families who had lived through the violence remembered the fear and loss. Communities struggled to heal from years of bloodshed and mistrust. But the story also revealed the resilience of those fighting back: law enforcement, social workers, and local leaders determined to prevent the cycle from repeating. The documentary ends with a haunting question that remains unanswered. How deep do the connections really go? While the major players have been arrested, it's clear that the global networks behind the cocaine trade are vast and complex. Liverpool's ports and streets may no longer be the center of the cartel's operations, but the flow of drugs and money continues, shifting with new players and changing tactics. This is the untold story of Liverpool's cocaine connection, a journey from the inner city streets of Toxteth to the heart of international drug cartels. It's a story of ambition, danger, and the enduring struggle between those who profit from crime and those who fight to stop it. Liverpool's shadowy past is a reminder that the battle against drugs is never truly over. It only changes shape and